A225, A225, Block 1. One Ambition and Anxiety, 1789 to 1840, edited by Paul Lawrence. Before we move on, I want to influence the youth today, young teenagers, mature teenagers, young adults, mature adults, OAPs. You want to broaden your horizon. You want to, rather than feeling disappointed, like trying to better your future, trying to better your circumstances. So we're going to try it. We'll give it our all. Give it our best shot. We can try and get ourselves better academics. Broaden our horizon is absolutely important, isn't it? We don't know what the future withholds. Anyway, one at Open University, Walton Hall, Milton Keynes. We're referencing our reading. So when we read, we're going to record our reading so we know where we left off. And also we can also listen to our notes back and go over our notes. It's our academics, okay? So very important. On page 40. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive. Page 40. We've got a pen to highlight what we need to highlight. I have a pen on board. Any words that you're not quite sure of, we'll highlight the words. Then we can write the meaning down in a book. Keep on top of the academics. Government was ended altogether by the Acts of the Union of 1800, leading to the rise of a variety of Irish nationalist movements, some of these inspired by Republican revolutionary ideals, advocated violence to sever the connection between Ireland and Britain, while others pressed for more moderate roads to self-government. Irish identity, particularly among the Catholic communities of Ireland, was therefore also often defined during this period in opposition to English identity. You will learn more about the complex processes of identity formation across the constituent regions of Britain and Ireland in Unit 6, but we cannot consider events taking place in the British Isles in isolation. You have already encountered the term Atlantic world in this unit in section 1.1, as well as the idea that the links existing between domestic and overseas developments need to be understood before we can truly understand the period of 1789 to 1840. The following exercise will help you to think about this a little further. Thinking back what you already read in the unit so far. How many examples of international influences acting on events in Britain and Ireland in this period can you call to mind? Briefly skim over the unit from the beginning up until this point, noting down mention or anything significant events, people or places outside Britain and Ireland, as well as just listing them. Add an explanatory note, no more than a one sentence, about the ways in which they might have influenced events taking place in Britain and Ireland. Getting used to reading and rereading text quickly, abstracting just like the key information, is an important skill for a historian. So I try not to spend more than 20 minutes piling your list. You will see the things I identified in bold in the specimen answer below. The French Revolution, 1789. This seminal event generated new ideas, new fears, and new hopes in parts of Britain and Ireland. American War of Independence, 1775 to 83. This led to the loss of British colonies there, leading to lessened trade and national anxiety among elites. The Revolutionary Wars, 1793 to 1802. These conflicts resulted in a loss of export markets and were a drain on the treasury. New markets export to the USA. This bolstered the British economy and led to the growth of the ports such as Bristol and Liverpool. Influential thinkers. A number are mentioned, included Thomas Paine and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The key point I hope you drew from this exercise is that although this module is primarily focused on Britain and Ireland, in order to understand events here, we must also look out for the influence of events. People and processes outside Britain and Ireland by 1800, Britain and Ireland had connections with almost every area of the globe. Both of particular significance was the Atlantic world, which you will study further in Unit 7. For ambitious social, political, and economic change, but also as a time that was enlivened by competing visions of the future and punctuated by anxieties over the pace and nature of change. Historians tend to be wary of using terms such as progress to describe the types of changes outlined above, which we will study in more detail in the remaining units of Block 1. They tend to shy away from this term as it implies a value judgment that, for instance, daily life or the power of a state in 1840 was somehow better than it was in 1789. Rather than just different, however, not to seek to apply any kind of macro, large scale explanation to the period 1789 to 1840, just to describe change as a succession of events and processes also seemed rather unsatisfactory. Modernity is another highly contested term, but one which probably retains more currency in relation to the years of 1789 to 1840. It was this a time during the Britain and Ireland become recognisably modern. Did the period 1789 to 1840 witness the one set of the modern age in Britain and Ireland? Many historians think so. James Vernon, 2014, for example, has argued the population growth and growing mobility in the period under discussion led to a society of strangers and the decline of society structured by familiar face to face relationships. This new society necessitated abstract and bureaucratic forms of authority, which in turn led both to expansion of the state and also to new forms of associational life, such as reformed societies, clubs, and trade unions. This is not the place for an extensive debate, but as you work through the rest of the units of Block 1, think about the period of 1789 to 1840 as one characterised by a tension between ambition and anxiety and by the gradual emergence of the modern Britain and Ireland. On Unit 2, The Industrial Revolution by Robin McKay. I think that is it. Oh, yeah. This unit will outline the main economic changes described by the term Industrial Revolution and investigate why they came about, highlight important regional differences within Britain in the impact of the Industrial Revolution. Introduce some debates among historians about the Industrial Revolution. The term revolution is usually used for sudden and dramatic change. It fits well the French Revolution, which was discussed in the unit. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive in Unit 1. But as you also saw in Unit 1, historians now question if an economic change during the Industrial Revolution was very rapid. Using the term revolution to describe a process that lasted roughly a century between 1750 and 1850 is problematic. Nor was the term industrial revolution used in Britain at that time, although contemporaries were aware of immense changes in certain industries and in certain parts of Britain. There was little sense of a single transforming process, yet to some historians the British Industrial Revolution is of fundamental importance. A leading British historian, Eric Hobsbawm, started his book in Industry and Empire with the bold claim that the Industrial Revolution marks the most fundamental transformation of human life in history of the world. For a brief period, it coincided with the history of a single country, Great Britain, 1969. It is If it is increasingly agreed that the process of industrialisation was not fast, was it at least dramatic? Although the quality of the 18th century statistics is often poor, it is possible to find figures that show a dramatic change in the scale of production, for instance. We have no reliable statistics for the production of cotton goods, but between 1772 to 74 and 1839 to 41, imports into England of raw cotton, bearing in mind that all cotton needed to be imported, increased a hundredfold from Griffin 2010. Massive increases in production at times also gave Britain a starting lead over all the other countries in the 1840s. It produced over half of Europe's coal and pig iron in Langton 2000. One way to justify the term revolution is, therefore, in terms of changes that made such a transformation in production possible. For Peter Stearns, for instance, the Industrial Revolution constituted one of those rare occasions in the world history when the human species altered its framework of existence. It brought fundamental changes in the ways people worked, where they lived, the potential of economic surplus available, and the numbers of people who could be supported around the world. The essence of the Industrial Revolution, however, was fairly simple. Stripped to its bare bones, the Industrial Revolution consisted of the application of new sources of power to the production process, achieved with transmission equipment necessary to apply this power to manufacturing. And it is contested of increased scale in human organisation that facilitated specialisation and coordination at levels pre-industrial groupings had rarely contemplated. Stern goes on to contrast, on the one hand, a pre-industrial world reliant on human and animal power with the labour organised in households or work gangs of relatively unspecialised labourers, with on the other an industrial one using machines powered by increasingly by fossil fuels and with work organised in large-scale production units or with a high degree of specialisation. The contrast that Stern makes are useful ones, and will return to them. They draw attention to two of the central processes of change: mechanisation and reorganisation of labour, that are identified with the process of industrialisation. Yet, as you will see, they are based on a measure of simplification. Industrial change was more varied and patchy than is caught in this generalisation. This unit aims to give a sense of both of the big changes that Stearns is attempted to summarise and of the more complex details that complicate the picture in section 2.1. You'll begin by looking at how historians have tried to quantify the economic changes that happened in Britain, and that why this has proved so difficult. Section 2.2 will then explore industrialisation at a regional level, showing how change was much faster in certain parts of Britain than in others, and how it differed between them. Finally, in section 2.3, the unit will explore how historians have discussed the Industrial Revolution, chiefly by examining a seminal article that analyses how the Industrial Revolution has been understood by different generations of historians. In the conclusion, the unit will return to Stern's definition of the Industrial Revolution to see how well it explains what happened in Britain. Throughout this unit, we'll focus on the economic process, industrialisation. The unit, the rise of the working class, will discuss the social consequences. The current unit will also concentrate on what happened in Britain, that is England, Scotland and Wales, rather than in the British Isles as a whole. Most work on the Industrial Revolution has looked at Britain because most of the industrial changes in this period occurred there. Industrialisation was patchier in Ireland and happened later. Surely you may be thinking, if there was an industrial revolution, it should be possible to observe its impact. If a revolution of the scale claimed by Hobsbawm and Stearns happened, must it not have had tangible and therefore measurable impact on the country? Economic historians have sought to explore this issue by calculating the growth of economy, or at least the industrial sector within it. The economy of growth. In its broad terms, changes in an economy can be thought about the terms of the percentage by which an economy or a sector is larger at the end of the year than at its beginning. In the post Second World War period, the UK enjoyed annual growth rates of above 4%, although in early 20th century growth rates around 2% are more usual. What these figures mean is that at the end of each year, the total value added to goods and services is 4% or 2% higher than at the beginning. Despite poor data, economic historians have tried to calculate annual growth rates for the period of the Industrial Revolution. Figure 2.1 gives an estimate by leading economic historian Nick Crafts of growth rates for industrial goods only, so including agriculture, commerce, and government activity. Looking at the figure 2.1 in detail, to understand a graph such as this one, you should look at the title and at any information given about the two axes. For the title, you can learn that the graph is meant to show the growth in industrial production between 1700 and 1914 for Britain. So England, Scotland, and Wales, but not Ireland. Turning to the two axes. In the graph, dates are given across the bottom, the x-axis, while the percentage by which industrial production grew in a year is given up the left-hand side, the y-axis. The curve therefore shows how much industrial production grew year by year. You could get the figure for each year by looking at where the curve intersects, with a line drawn straight up each side. Thus, a line drawn up from 1720 intersects with the curve at about 0.9%. The graph, however, is more useful for looking at the trend over time, as the title says, than at data for individual years. What estimates are given in figure 2.1 for growth in the 18th century? When was growth highest according to the start? This should take around 10 minutes. According to this graph, growth rates were low for much of the 18th century and indeed below 1% of the nearly all the period of up to 1780. However, those rose towards the end of the century, almost reaching 2% by 1800. Growth was much higher in the next 40 years, peaking at about 3.5% in 1830. Economic historians, like economists, want quantitative data. In order to be able to measure things, as you have seen in figure 2.1, data can be measured allows us to understand change in ways that textual descriptions can't. But how can graphs be complied for a period when, as you saw in Unit 1, contemporaries were only just beginning to collect statistical data? Craft's work is a good example of how this can be done and of why we always need to be cautious of the seeming certainty of statistics and graphs. Essentially, Crafts collected any usual data he could find and used it to calculate estimates. Understanding how he complied his data helps us to use it critically. First, Crafts identified 13 major industrial sectors for which government or other data existed, perhaps because there was a tax on output or because the quantities of raw materials imported. Such data was inevitably incomplete. A government commission in 1783, for instance, concluded that excise officers collected only 75% of the revenue due. Nor was it safe to conclude that the percentage loss to tax evasion was constant. New procedures in the 1780s, for example, meant that tax collection in the paper industry improved dramatically, exaggerating the increase in the production in these years. In Daunton, 1995, import figures were also of varying usefulness. They were good for cotton, where all the raw materials was imported, but figures for other industries such as linen and silk due on changing mix of home produce and imports from abroad. Second, crafts calculated how much value manufacturers added to the products they processed. Thus, a manufacturer in the cotton industry might have concentrated on one or more of a number of processes, from spinning raw cotton into yarn, all the way weaving yarn into cloth, to dyeing and printing the cloth, each time adding value to the product. What seemed a simple calculation of the price of finished goods minus the cost of raw materials is likely to vary depending on how many processes the business carried out, as well as, of course, differing between firms. Crafts again used what figures he could to calculate the value added by each firm and then estimate totals for the industry as a whole in Griffin 2010. Third, Crafts needed to aggregate these figures for 13 sectors and take account of change over time. Here, the big problem was that the cotton industry grew faster than others and so needed to be a larger share of the total as time went on. Finally, the 13 sectors that Crafts identified were not all industrial sectors, and a number of important ones had been left out because there was insufficient usable data. How safe was it to assume that other sectors would have grown in the same manner? This was a particular problem because the sectors included were mostly such as coal and iron, producing outputs that were used by other industries, while the industries producing finished products